Hopefully nothing explodes. Fucking Windows, man. Everything works for like 2 years, and then all of a sudden decides not to. That's working. We're live behind the blue curtain. We hit this button. Hello, welcome to Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about a campaign pitch me from Buddy. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we like to talk about games, and a campaign pitch me is something we haven't done for a while, but Mango's getting back from Gen Con, and we can't talk about Baldur's Gate yet, so this is a pretty good reason to go for it. And honestly, Baldur's Gate has put me, oh god, in such a D&D place. I'm in such a D&D place right now. Holy fuck. Okay, so a campaign pitch me is when one of us pitches the other on a general sort of approach to a campaign, right? To a D&D campaign, including a I don't know, just all of the individualized kind of pieces.
I was
of
gonna say it's
and
a little bit more than an individual approach. It's like a storyline. It's not. It's typically
absolutely.
system agnostic, but
But then also talking about, like what are the interesting and like riffing a little, right? Like what are the interesting things you can do with like with an idea like that, right? Like where can you kind of go? And I have had this idea in my head for the longest time about a campaign set in essentially, I wouldn't want to do an actual World War II version, but essentially in a fictionalized version of the Battle of Stalingrad from World War II. So, like, to put some history down, right? Stalingrad is just a fucking... It is an unreal battle, kind of told from beginning to end. Stalingrad is it's a city on the Volga River. The Volga is a river that's, I think it goes south into the Caspian Sea. So just kind of in the steppes by it might even be in Ukraine at this point. It's a city that's on that river, and it's a really big linchpin of the river to get kind of from one side to the other. Obviously, militarily, controlling a city on a river like Volgograd, as it is known now, Stalingrad as it was known then, is incredibly, incredibly important, right? And basically, the story of Stalingrad is that the Nazi attack, Operation Barbarossa, right? This is when Hitler breaks the non-aggression pact with Stalin. He invades Russia, pushes in with the Third Reich, and is trying to get to Moscow before winter in order to break the backs of the eastern front of his sort of like Russian enemies. The turning point on the eastern front is Stalingrad, and the reason why is it just becomes a meat grinder of German and Russian soldiers, right? Because the city is a city, it offers a lot of place for cover, so it's actually a really useful spot to put tons and tons of soldiers because they just can't be shelled into oblivion, right? When you have artillery just attacking the French countryside, for instance, right? There's nothing to hide behind. There's nothing that can save your life, right? But in a city, you actually have essentially fortifications because you have all these brick buildings, right? It can save people's lives from an attack like that. So both Russia and Germany are putting people into Stalingrad, right? And they're basically just filling the whole city end to end with soldiers, right? But as winter comes, it becomes just this like hellish, brutal place to try and survive, right? On the German side, you are far from home. You are on the very tip of the front lines, right? You tend to have pretty good supplies, but those supplies are so rickety, right? Because any attack from any flanking attack could disrupt things because you are so far from sort of your base of operations, right? The place where those supplies are coming in from, right? On the Russian side, you're defending your home, but you don't have supplies at all because Russia just is the Soviet Union is just doing a terrible job keeping its men outfitted and equipped. There are guys going into Stalingrad, famously 2 soldiers for every gun, right? They don't have enough guns. So they have these you have a partner, right? You and another guy, and if your partner dies, you take his rifle. That's your rifle now. If you see a dead guy on the ground, you grab that rifle, right? And you're fighting over city streets, you're fighting over blocks and over like neighborhoods, right? Over even just buildings, and some of these buildings are real buildings, doing work. Some of these buildings are factories, right, that are in the midst of everything, trying desperately to put out the supplies that you need, right? Making boots for the army or something like that, right? But at the same time, some of these factories are just completely bombed out, nothing, right? Because they have been absolutely annihilated. In the story of history, right, Stalingrad is a major win for the Soviet Union because that thing I had mentioned earlier comes true. The Russian lines, the Russian advance sort of slows in winter, and this brutal, fighting is taking place. And the Russians eventually surround the city, right? In a pretty typical sort of I don't even know what you would call that. Like they entrapped the Germans inside of Stalingrad, but they couldn't get any new supplies because they couldn't get, they couldn't break out. Yeah, right, exactly. They basically trapped. It's an entrapment, is what it's called. And even in places like in like the Hearts of Iron 4 subreddit, people will get thousands and thousands of upvotes for like, raid my Stalingrad, and it will just show all of the armies that you were able to encircle, right? And you are now starving out of your supplies. Yeah, Stalingrad, all of those German forces, the Germans actually tried a lot in order to keep themselves upright, including just airlifting supplies, right? Because the Luftwaffe actually did have control, it did have air superiority, but they just couldn't keep it. They just couldn't keep it up, and eventually that entire army surrenders to the Soviet Union. I think it's like 100,000 guys or whatever. So the essential campaign pitch me is for D&D game, but you can do this in anything. I'm going to use D&D just because it's easy, right? But like theoretically, you could also do this on like, a Star Wars game, right? Starfighter game, any like a sci-fi. You can maybe do a post-apocalypse version of this in any sort of post-apocalypse kind of kind of system or whatever. The idea is the party is a group of soldiers, right? A squad who are being introduced to this meat grinder of a battle in action, in motion, right? And it progresses in my head from being one of the grunts, like the frontline soldiers, to becoming I want to say like a special forces, right? But eventually the entire battle is won by these characters essentially completing the campaign, right? So the thing that it takes to win the battle of fantasy Stalingrad, right, is to get a party of adventurers to level 20 or whatever your capstone would end up being in this instance, right?
Or high enough.
Yeah, high enough, right, that they can go achieve that victory. Is it that's like the oh, I'm sorry,
okay, something you haven't
real quick.
Something you haven't clarified is, do you envision the players being part of the German army, or the German army equivalent and breaking out, or the Russian army the German army equivalent and breaking out? Yes, that one, or the Russian army.
No, actually, I was thinking the opposite. I think the Soviet
That sounds worse, and I don't know why.
Oh really? Oh man, what did I do?
Maybe you're blowing it out. Maybe you're just blowing it out.
Oh, maybe I was just blowing it out. Yeah, hold on.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. I think the more interesting start is actually to be essentially on the Soviet side of that battle, right? Where you're starved for resources and you're just kind of like, it's kind of, imagine putting a like a group of adventurers in there with sort of nothing, right? And this is a part of the thing for me. You don't actually start at level 1 with gear or gold, right? You start at level 1 with like nothing, and the very first encounter is going over like a recent battle and looting corpses to try and find something to use, right? So it's not, oh, I'm a fighter and I start with a greatsword. It's, I'm a fighter. I don't start with anything. And the very first encounter is, you know, essentially imagine your sergeant going, "You're the new recruits. Do you have any gear?" Everybody says no. It's like, okay, well, 3 blocks that way, 6 blocks that way, right? We just had a squad of guys get taken out. It's up to you to go loot their shit, right? And I feel like this is also such a core part of the fantasy. The idea that even from level 0, right, the operation of getting armor, getting weapons, right, is something that happens in universe, and you have no sort of choice. You just kind of have to figure it out, right, even when you're under fire. Because I think something that's an interesting sort of thing that doesn't happen in like a level 1 kind of campaign is the idea of like donning armor for the first time.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is so essentially the idea would be that you play as the Russian army, and then you eventually so see the reason I think this doesn't work is because Stalingrad, like, you know, Russia wins because of overwhelming numbers, right? Like this is kind of like, this is history, right? Like, you know, winter comes, you can't beat Russia in the winter, and they also have 10 billion people, and they don't care if a billion of them die, right? So my first reaction is to say something like, I think the natural thing here is you want it to always be an inversion, right? The natural thing here is like you do something like, you know, the evil empire has, you know, basically press ganged you into service, right? And so you're playing for the Russian equivalents, but then he'll face turn, you know, obviously without saying that the Germans were the faces in the real World War II, right?
Yeah, obviously. So to be clear, that I like moralistically, I don't care about the Russians or it is the setting of Stalingrad that I think is so creatively interesting, not, you know, the ideologies behind it.
Yeah, right. Yes, you know, no, Nazis versus communists, not a fun thing to pick sides.
And also, to be clear, I don't think it's interesting to do an allegory, right? I wouldn't want the battle to follow, you know, the same progression, right? I think it's the situation and the vibes that really appeal to me.
Okay,
but
so
anyway, go on.
That is interesting because I don't have a full campaign around this, but I do have an idea for like a sub adventure, which is basically the Bay of Pigs invasion, where you play as essentially a frogman squad and similar things. We could talk about that later.
Oh, interesting.
If we've got time. But I think the way that you'd want to do this is, right, you know, evil empire press gangs you into service. Like you said, you don't have anything. You have to pick up stuff. And then eventually, like, you know, you realize, you know, oh, there's hope on the other side, and you turn, but this is right when the evil empire starts winning, and so you have to break out, right? Like, and I think that's what makes it compelling, because you never want to be on the winning side, right? That's how you build the stakes, and that's like the easy way to tell that story, right? You know, the Germans have the initial, or the German equivalent have the initial advantage because they have the supply and they have the momentum, right? And obviously you flavor it a little bit differently. And then as the tide turns, you want to be on their side because you don't want to be, I think, like, you know, you don't want to be, burnt, you know. You
want to be the underdog, right?
Yes, exactly. Right. Like, and you know, that I think that's the way you'd want to play it. But I think that's actually a really cool idea, because I think the idea of breaking the siege is cool, but I also think like what you said is you know having to come from literally nothing and build your way up.
That is actually really interesting. I think I would want to phrase it a little bit differently, in the sense that kind of thing could be a choice, right? It's sort of like when we did Hell's Rebels, right? There was a pretty momentous choice that we've talked about on the cast in the past, where at the end of book 3, Barzillai Thrun, who was the villain up to that point, came to you guys and sort of offered to team up. As long as, you know, he got what he wanted, he was willing to give you what you wanted. And you guys took that offer, actually, right? and true to his, and listen, Barzillai Thrun was a lawful evil guy. He was true to his word, right? And he fought with you until the very end. And I think that sort of choice is always really interesting in a game like this, right? Where you can create a compelling argument in a way for both sides, right?
Yeah.
Because I do think that there is something to be said for, right, authoritarian regime. I think here's what I would want to frame it as. One, you have authoritarian regime who are kind of decidedly evil, right? But the people that you're working with aren't evil, right?
Yeah.
I think this is kind of the, like the
this is like a thing in Band of Brothers about this, right? Like the German foot soldier isn't, aren't typically ideologically aligned. They're kind of like just fighting for their country type of deal. Right.
Yes, absolutely, right? And so the idea, I think you could kind of pose the question of, do you want to defect as on at least one side? Do you want to fight back against the evil empire, right? Or do you want to kind of stick with your friends and comrades, right? The people that you have been fighting this battle with are good people who you like, but you know that they are doing things in service of essentially evil, right? Even if there is no villain, it's not like you're gonna end the campaign by killing Joseph Stalin himself, right? It's not like there's a villain in the battle that you can go, right, like turn against. It is the system that is bad, essentially. And I feel like you could actually kind of mirror that on the opposite side, right? Which is to say that, sort of the attacking force are a true liberation army, right? In the sense of like a crusade. I would think about it this way, right? Imagine paladins, like imagine a group of paladins who are attacking the evil empire, right? But I think the drama there is, can you convince them to allow you to defect, right? These are people who are used to killing you on sight, right? And one of the things that I guess is a little bit touchy, but I think is interesting along these sorts of lines, is the nature of fantasy races playing into this kind of thing, right? Obviously, a person isn't necessarily Russian or German just on their face, right? But like you could exist in a world where I see an orc and I kill it, right? Part of what makes D&D is the ability to just at a glance recognize these creatures, whether that's creatures of different races or monsters or whatever else, right? Like you're understanding who's in kind of the monster manual. And so the idea that you have to kind of like not just sort of betray these like friends, right? But sort of contend with the prejudices of the people who you might believe to be in the moral right, I think is actually pretty interesting and compelling.
That's an interesting way to go with it too. I was gonna say like the other way you could play this too is make both kind of like morally ambiguous, right? Like make the they press ganged you, but like it's not like they're the worst people. It's not you just make like you're basically peons caught up in a conflict between two powerful nations that don't give two shits for your survival regardless, right?
Yep. Yeah, sure.
And then you just kind of make it about surviving, right? Like you don't actually make it about you. Like your party doesn't care about the actual outcome of the battle, right? Like you care about you guys, and like maybe you can also like build up like like a coterie around you or something like that. And the idea is just to survive and get out, and it's just however you do that, right? That's like a very desperate kind of like dark. Like you don't do that quite noble, right? I don't think you just like you strip all the idealism out of it and just kind of like we're just looking to survive. We want to go home to our families type of deal type thing. You could play it that way too, but I think any of those approaches really works all right. Like I think all three of those actually could work for a particular way to do it.
Yeah, so in my head, book one is very much surviving, right? The idea, I mean, I'm calling it book one, but I would, I don't know. I guess I just like to think about these sort of terms. But really, what I'm saying is like levels like 1 to 4, right? This is where you guys are sort of nothing. Man, my audio is really weird, huh?
Yeah,
I'm like looking at the thing, and it feels like I'm blowing out the game.
Yeah,
like,
you
super hard.
You're pretty blown out, but I didn't want to screw up the.
I wonder if I hit my. Sorry, I have some like knobs. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, that's worse.
What on earth is happening? Man, I don't know what's going on. This is crazy. I wonder if it's like a computer setting thing.
You might have like your recording volume too high. Right before we flipped over, I think I said, Windows works for 2 years and falls apart. It was also falling apart on my side for different reasons, but
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess there's nothing I can really do but just keep on.
Yeah, I would say you sound softer, but still just as blown out, and I don't know what's happening.
Yeah, what is up with that? I lowered my input volume in Discord, I guess, to try and make it.
Yeah, I don't think that's.
Man. Anyway, maybe the answer is I can't really solve this. Or maybe the answer is, do you want me to switch back to my other mic?
Yeah, I think that's probably the right way to go.
Okay, I will do that for Discord.
You need to turn up your gain again, because now you're very quiet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway. So in my head, that first book, that level 1 to 4 thing, right? That's very built around the idea of survival, right? This is when like you're nothing, you're maggots, you're just trying to survive. You get told by people to do, just like the most basic inane things like hold this square, this fountain, right? And it's like you're fighting, like the battles that you're fighting are just against like enemy, enemy foot soldiers, but you're not really doing anything more complex than that, right? In my head, this sort of like sets the sort of baseline considerations for what's getting done, and it's before things kind of like pop off for you and your team. But obviously, just like fighting over city blocks for, session after session gets boring or whatever. Which is when, the players sort of level up into a place of fame, right? Which is, a battle, a real sort of fight that tests their most complicated that it's a battle that tests their real their like real skills, and they come out like against all odds, right?
Yeah.
And it's in that battle where they earn sort of fame for the first time, and the trajectory swings pretty wildly after that. Really, I think part of what I would want to do is I would want to create like an obligation system, sort of like in Star Wars, I think, actually. Because I think Star Wars obligations are a really interesting way to sort of create narrative tension inside of a battle, but I wouldn't want to do it in the backstory. I'd want to do it dynamically. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like introducing a character, or I'm sorry, maybe a better way to phrase this would be like, imagine in that first early phase, you fight a mini boss or like a villain, and that villain becomes like a recurring character. It's like that kind of an obligation. I think that becomes like interesting and compelling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and my pitch for this, and I feel like everyone has done this, but I've never seen it done right. And I think this is the secret. Okay. Everyone says it won't work, but I'm here to tell you that I could make it work. It's to create a rival party on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you are fighting against another like squad of adventurers who are fighting like, block by block, city street by city street kind of thing. And they become sort of the evil mirror to your good whatever. I don't know. I had this idea before. I was thinking about like you could defect or whatever. But I think the Ash Ketchumness of it, where like, we talked with Josh a couple of weeks ago about how like Pokemon, I guess it was last week,
Yeah.
about how Pokemon is, kind of like baby's first JRPG, but they have that thing where Gary or Blue or whatever you want to name him is is like a recurring evil opposite. And I think that you could do that, but with like a party, and it would be fun.
Yeah, I think it'd be tough though, right? Like, cause like I think it's tough to like really set it up in a way that like resonates, right? Like, is the idea that you beat them at the end of this first stage?
I don't know. I think it would probably take a little bit longer because really, because the full trajectory is like, going from nobody to heroes, right?
Yeah.
So let's say book 1 is survival, book 2 is fame, right? Book 3 would be outside of the city, but participating in these extra flanking. Essentially, imagine a commander in the city who's like, this unit, whatever you guys want to call yourselves, right? Like unit 835, right, is doing exceptional things. Well, the real thing we need to do to win this battle is to, let's say, do this flanking maneuver. And so now all of a sudden you're not fighting in a city anymore. You're not fighting in city streets. Now you're fighting in the plains outside of the battle, and you have completely different, right, like a completely different environment to kind of tangle with, right? Where you're rooting out artillery nests, right? Or fighting with cavalry charges, right? Like this kind of thing. And that's the thing that I think spices the campaign up to make it more for various. I guess various is the word I want to use.
I've got a so. Okay, so maybe I'm a little bit too stuck in the frame, but I've got a couple of ideas on this too, right? Like, so okay. I think for this first thing, I think you really want to sell that everybody's really scrabbling, right? Like if you're a caster, you don't have a component pouch. If you're prepared, you don't have a spell book, right? Like you have to because you want to make it them scrabble. You want them to be like, you have to find, like, if the spell says you need bat guano, you need to go find bat guano because you don't have your component pouch, right? Like, and that's how you make the spellcaster scrabble in the same way that like the more gear
fighter has to get like an unrusted sword, right?
Yeah, right. Like your wizard, he finds like a half-torn spell book with like light and like shocking grasp on it, right? And like and he's got to like he's like stapling pages together, right, to like get like a thing. So I'm with you there. I think the fame segment makes sense. I think you like in my mind, right, in universe, it's kind of like the like Soviet propaganda posters. It's like be like the heroes of Kavalder Square or whatever, right? Like and the Empire's like using you and putting you up on a pedestal. I think what you want is the rival party to initially be like another squad that's similarly situated to you, right? Like on your side. Right, like they're just like they're not directly opposed,
right.
And then I think the thing that popped in my head for this third arc is to say we need you to run this flanking attack, but it's going to come out that flanking attack is actually not the actual thing. That's basically like you're running a diversion because everybody knows the heroes of Kavalder Square, while your rival party is actually doing the real objective. And I think the way I would play this is that like the Empire is looking to martyr you, so they don't expect you to come back, right? And like if you want, and that's where you can put the turn opportunity if you want that kind of thing. Again, obviously I have a very particular vision for this, but I think that's like one good option for it, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I was going into exactly opposite place. I actually like the idea that your rival party is inside of the Empire, right? It is another unit in another squad that you are contending with, sort of for fame, right? But I think the climax of that third book isn't about being martyred. It's about doing something heinous, right? It's about like, okay, you complete this attack, and now you have 6,000 prisoners of war, right? And you get a direct order not to bring them to not to capture them, but to slaughter them, right? And it's like and this is the part where it's like, holy fuck! Now I was able to put aside. Yeah, I was just a fighter, right? But now the Empire's asked me to do something brutal. Am I willing to do that? The answer might be yeah. And your party is going to continue on, and you guys are going to kind of go down this evil route, right? But it might be no, and that's the point of defection. And the people who step up and do this massacre, right, and kind of own your fame and fortune from then on is sort of your alternate sort of like rival group. That is a really interesting sort of.
I think the way you play it is your rival party. they're like the sons of like oligarchs, right? Like, you know, they're like the rich kids or whatever, right? Like you know, what's it in the Outsiders, the socialists and the greasers, they're the socialists, right? Like they have the privilege and they're mad at you because you're famous and that should be their fame, and this is all a game to them, right? And they don't hesitate when the order is given down, like you said, to slaughter. Yeah, I think that works too. That actually works super well, right? Like they're like, why would you, like, you know, and maybe they start to come around on you, right? They're like, you're actually effective, right? You're not so bad for a lowborn or whatever, right? And then they just start like casually like offing the prisoners, right? And you know, and that's when you either, you know, embrace or turn, right? Like,
yeah, it's funny because part of what I think is interesting about this is something that I've always found really fun and compelling as like a spectacle, right? Like as a set piece, is like thinking about fantasy like war, right? What would warfare look like, right? I think this is a lot of what makes like the Battle of Helm's Deep and like Lord of the Rings, right? Like resonate with people. It's like, oh, well, obviously, you know, we don't have an army of 100,000 orcs with trolls with catapults on their back, right? But part of what makes this sort of setting cool is imagining what it would be like for this fantasy race to lay siege, right? Total Warhammer 3 is like built on this, right? Yeah, when the lizardmen lay siege, they have these big ass dinosaurs, right? When chaos comes, they're going to, you know, perform heinous rituals and summon greater demons, right? All of this kind of thing, and you could have a ton of different variation along these sorts of lines that are like very like setting specific. But in my head, I think a lot of the exploration that's getting done is getting done on that level, right? Where it's like your mission now, like actually, a good example of this, something I did in Hell's Rebels that I thought was a good structure, or that I liked doing, was introducing certain enemies and then reintroducing them later as a different kind of caliber of enemy, right? So for instance, I think you guys fought a maybe it was a minotaur, right? Like it were like a gorble, I think is what it might have been called. It's like you know, like a large minotaur. They're kind of they have a big great axe. They just like beat the shit out of you. This was part of when you guys were fighting beastmen, right? The beastmen, when they get hit, they have a spray of blood, and their blood is infectious, and it can turn you into a beastman. It's a poison, right? This kind of thing. And I think you guys fought one of these gorbles at like level 4. But then you again, maybe around level 8 or 9, you can now the Gorbles go from, oh, this is a one entity enemy, right, boss enemy for us to take down at the apex of a session, versus this is, you know, we can mow down a group of these, right? And I think you would want to do something similar, right? Like the capstone of that first book, of that survival book, is like fighting something like maybe like a war troll, if we're just going to be generic about it, right? But then later down the line, part of what makes you guys so heroic is that, oh yeah, like I can like snipe a war bull or a war troll from like miles and miles away, and it's not even an issue, right? Like that kind of a thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think you're right. Like having kind of having a PSC setting lets you kind of like do that progression. That makes sense. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So like let's push a little bit further in then, you know.
Okay, so the other thing I was thinking was that, so my initial thought didn't have the defection, so I just have to guess.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe include. But a piece of Stalingrad that I like a lot is the idea of, okay, the encirclement goes off, right? We have 100,000 men behind enemy lines, right? They are low on everything, and we have one resource that our enemy doesn't, which is air power. So what we're going to do is we're going to load up these planes, and we're just going to drop supplies into the city, and that's how we're going to keep them up. In my head, the way that this part of the battle worked is about, okay, you know, now you guys become sky pirates, right? Your job is no longer to fight in the streets of the city, right? You know, it doesn't matter. Like, it would be a waste of your time to sit there and like go and contest these crates. That's for you know, the new press gangs, whatever, right? Like rank and file to do. Your job is to go and bring down these, you know, supply missions, essentially, right? Doing kind of like a almost like a small Pirates of the Caribbean sort of like ship combat esque thing, but with like airships over the city, right? Where you are the Empire is sort of outmatched in aerial combat, but with the power of you guys, you're going to be able to like equalize it or whatever. I guess you could just do the same sort of thing, but in reverse, in a way, right? Or you can maybe, you know, try and uh I don't know, solidify the solidify the supply runs that you're getting in, or maybe like you could make some sort of like big villainous piece of things to deal with if you were on like,
I say whichever side you're like, you know, you're not running both sides of this story, right? Like if your players defect, they defect, or if they don't, right? You just make that side be the dominant, like, you know, the other side is the dominant air side, right? Like either things have gone better than expected for the Empire.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking about that, but that actually does make sense, right? You would make it so that you have to break through their big aerial defenses. Yeah. And I like the idea of like, because this is one of those like classic D&D things, right? I think airships are like a classic D&D. Everybody loves the idea of these giant airships. Eberron obviously had airships that were powered by bound elementals, but I think there's a million different versions of this that you could, you know, use, from sort of like artificer versions of airships to like more magical versions of it or whatever. And so that's about sort of kind of securing this like aerial, you know, like supply line thing. And then book 5 in my thing was, even this isn't working, right? This is a stopgap measure, but we're not actually winning. We can't win the battle with this, right? So now what you need to do, you have the enemy encircled. You're beating back, I guess, in the pro Empire version, you are beating back their supply lines, right? But you need to break their backs. You need to like end them, right? And that becomes essentially what I would call a mega dungeon, right? Which would be sort of crushing the resistance entirely by attacking in like a daring raid their headquarters, right? Which is where they have all of their high level shit, all of their high level guys, right, doing all of their high level stuff. And
actually,
and
yeah,
the thing
I would say like the way you do this on the pro Empire side, right, is like, you know, turns out they have a teleportation circle and they're still getting supplies in. You have to kill their, like, you know, their teleportation mage or whatever, right? Like the linchpin, the linchpin to their continued success, that type of thing.
Okay, so I have an interesting thing for that, but yeah. And so the idea is you're making this daring attack on the enemy command, and you end up killing the enemy commander. This is like the ultimate sort of battle in like book 5 or whatever. But unbeknownst to you, in the original conception of this, the rival party is doing the same thing and has massacred your side as well, but they're worse about it, and they essentially set off what I would consider like a magical, essentially like nuclear device, right? And decimate, you know, like the city. But it's not just any device, it is something that presents a new, in like, incredible threat. So something akin to like the world wound or like chaos rifts or something, like where it is an extra planar gate where now you have demons from the abyss or something, right? Flooding into the material realm. And this is what sets up the final kind of context for the campaign, is now you guys are sort of reversed. There is no command structure. Everything has broken down, and the only thing that heroes can do is find a way to go close that rift to prevent the entire world from being overrun with, you know, kind of like whatever else. And closing that rift is the kind of ultimate thing that happens in the campaign that ends the battle sort of like once and for all, right? That was what I had initially pitched, but obviously some of that would change depending on how you would have to go about it, right? Maybe, I guess, if you don't defect, the rival party would have to defect at that point, and you are now on opposite sides, kind of going on no matter what. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that could work. You could also do something like, what is it? Like you could like if you wanted to be like really bad about it, right? You could have them kind of be like spiteful or whatever, or like like you accomplish your goal, but it turns out like there was a time limit that you didn't know about that you always miss, right? Like this needed to be done by this. It's like basically they send you on this mission, but they're not telling you is that somebody on the top, right, needs this done and doesn't really believe in your ability to do it, and so they give you until this time, but whoever that time is never told to your party, so you always miss it. And it's like, all right, well then we're going with option X, and option X is opening this portal, right? And it just goes horribly wrong, right? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah. I feel like this is the kind of thing that has to happen in like essentially D&D games. You have to get to this otherworldly point, just because like I don't think there are a lot of credible high level threats, right, that don't come out of like you can't put a level 17 party up against anything that like originates in the material world except for like the Terrask, right? Something like that.
Yeah. Oh, you know what you could do? You could do that like again, this is let's wait on the opposite party, but you could do something like like I was saying, like the teleportation mage, right? Like it's not a teleportation, it's just like they straight up made a deal with the devil, right? To like and that's what causes it to pop out, right? Like I think you want to play part of this by ear, right? Like, because you can have a couple different relationships with the rival party. You can have pure antagonism, in which case you want them to be the bad guys. You can have like dark but friendly rivalry, right? And you can do kind of like the heel face turn thing, right? It's like command, decided that you weren't going fast enough, and so they unleashed like the magic nuke or whatever. And at that point, the rival party says like, even this is too far for us. And like they redeem themselves in fighting against like the hordes or whatever. I think you want to play that depending on how your party interacts with the rival party, right? Because they're like I said, Band of Brothers plays it like you kind of see that even though they never interact with but they kind of like give you a hint that there was kind of like another story happening on the other side of the screen that you never see, right? Like if you have that kind of relationship where they're just other people fighting for the other side, right? Like you figure out how to deal with that, right? Like if it's their side that like drops the yeah. I think you want to play all that by ear, but I think that all makes sense and that works. I think you want that to be otherworldly because it lets you pull in those elements if you want it to be, right? Like a dangerous third party lets you redeem elements that want to be redeemed, not redeem elements that don't want to be redeemed, right? But you take it out of the direct hands of the opposing party. Essentially, you want it to be, you don't want your rival party to be the big bads. You want them to be kind of like, the man in front of the man, right? Like, or that you want the actual threat to be like one step above them. That way you can have them, like, you defeat them at the end of either book 5 or like, they heel face turn at the end of book 5 or something like that, depending on context.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess I was envisioning the rival party as the big boss, right? Because in a way, I sort of like the idea that there's not a real villain in the sense of it's not that there's like a big bad evil guy, right? Who's doing the thing, right? You don't go to Berlin and kill Hitler. You don't go to Moscow, right, and kill fantasy Stalin, right? It is the specific people that the war itself is kind of outside of the scope of this campaign, right? You would probably learn more about it. I think it would be interesting to kind of like know more or think about, like what's going on or hear news or maybe some stuff interacts with it, right? But realistically, I was thinking that the villains at the end of the campaign are sort of these evil opposites, and it is putting down the enemy version of you that really sinks the chances of the opposite side of winning this, winning this battle in whatever.
If that's the case, I think you don't want demons and devils. You want like something like a Tarrasque. You want essentially a force of nature. You want like the elemental planes, right? Like
the elemental planes would be perfect for that, right?
Yeah. So essentially something that's like mindless, right? Like maybe it's like a rift to like a planet where a bunch of like dumb like shitty mindless aliens roll through, right? Or like I don't know. essentially the point is you don't want you want the thing they unleash to be like kind of like neutral on its face. It's just kind of like causing havoc because you want all the moral weight.
Yeah, actually the Beastmen were a lot like this in that Hell's Rebels campaign, because the Beastmen aren't aligned to anything. They are, a person gets infected with, I can't even remember what it was called, like boiling blood was
something like
the
that,
poison or whatever, and it turns them into a Beastman, and at that point they are just sort of a slave to their mindless instincts for slaughter and death, right? And they join in these war herds. You can imagine something like that, like a biological, or like zombies would also be a good example of this, right? Not, a lich shows up and resurrects a bunch of zombies, but like, no, like they like release a zombie plague.
Yeah, like science
right?
Zombies, right? Like ghouls might be the right way to do that in D&D parlance, although ghouls have maintained some sentience. You want something mindless, so that's the important part, right? Like,
I mean, you can also just do it like with and maybe there's a version. I think a lot of what makes something like this fun is the idea of pulling in these different pieces and referring back to them, right? Like, so for instance, imagine maybe like in siege terms, right? You have something like a carnosaur, right? Like a Tyrannosaurus Rex kind of thing, right? And maybe you have a like maybe you have an empire that's using these war animals, like these war beasts, right? Kind of in place of what we would think of as machinery. They don't have tanks; they have triceratops, right? They don't have, they don't have artillery in the sense of catapults. They have like, huge bugs that can spit giant globs of acid or something, hundreds of meters, that these like crazy war druids have, bred into existence, this kind of thing, right? And the portal, you can even say that the portal that opens isn't or the teleportation circle that you sabotage, right? Or I'm sorry, I guess that they sabotage, right? It doesn't open to when their sabotage goes off. It's not that it opens a portal to another world, it's that it opens a portal to this sort of these reinforcements, essentially. Which is maybe, I guess, a little different than a neutral sort of thing, but it would create that kind of game-ending threat where, well, they're going to win the battle because now they have this, crazy, unstable portal directly to their homeland.
right?
That is,
okay, that makes sense.
maybe it's like, but maybe it's terrible in some other way, right? Like it's growing like a black hole, right? Or the interaction between atmospheres or whatever is allowing some terrible, crazy kind of like an invasive species to take over.
Yeah, so I like in that case, it doesn't have to be neutral. You just have to set up that like, whichever army is doing this isn't native, and like you can defeat them here. But if they, this portal essentially means that like they can bring the full might of their army, which no one doubts would be able to crush you if they can get it through the portal, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, like yeah, no, the thing that popped in my head weirdly was like the end of Endgame, the Avengers Endgame, right? Like like basically the villainous version of that, right? Like
yeah.
But yeah, that makes sense. And that's like your book 6, right? Like is like fighting that off, and I think. Yeah, I think essentially what you want book 6 to be is like that opens, and then you find a solution, and then as you go to implement the solution, the rival party tries to keep you from implementing a solution. That's when you defeat them. Then you spike the throw the potion of unending closing the hole into the hole, right? And and you solve the problem. And then you basically I think you want to like not have to do so much cleanup, just a little bit, like maybe a little bit of like Battle for the Shire type stuff, and then
I kind of feel like this is like a Rogue One ending that I'm pitching, where it's
oh
like
yeah,
it's not just that you go to the portal. It's that you go through the portal and you have to close it on the other
Oh
side.
yeah, that makes
And
sense.
whatever that looks like, you're in the palace of the enemy, right? And you need to shatter the crystal that is that is powering this portal, and doing that is going to get rid of your way home. But that's just what a good soldier does, right? And I guess kind of that's sort of the like the moral of the story in a certain sense for like what a campaign like this is about. It's about like being a good soldier, like the best soldier you could possibly be, even when it means like sacrificing yourself by closing this portal that would otherwise like completely turn the tide of the war.
Do you know, have you ever played Devil May Cry 5?
Mm-mm.
Okay, so spoilers for Devil May Cry 5. But at the end of that, basically the series main long running villain Virgil has split himself into kind of like his pure evil self and like his emo self, who is V. And basically the whole game is you're playing as Dante, Nero, who is Virgil's son, and V, which is Virgil's like semi good side, trying to stop Virgil from like fucking everything up. But the end of that is basically Virgil reforms to his true self, and Virgil and Dante dive through a portal and lock themselves, close it from the other side. And basically the end credits is them back to back, like fighting through a horde of demons. I think that's kind of what you want, right? Like,
Yeah. No, it's like have you ever played the end of Halo Reach?
No.
Okay, so Halo Reach has one of the best endings I've ever played, which is it's not even an ending. You're doing this whole thing. You're fighting the Covenant. Reach is like in the Halo lore.
Yeah, it's like I'm familiar with the concept, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it is the first planet that gets attacked by the Covenant, right?
Spoilers for Halo.
At the end, yes, spoilers for Halo. And at the end of Halo Reach, what happens is I think you hit the beacon. The Covenant has shut off communications from Reach, so nobody knows that Reach is being attacked. But you hit the beacon that penetrates whatever, and you send the message out to the the Earth. I think it's like the USMT or whatever they call the
the space
Earth
good guys
people,
yeah,
the space good guys in Halo, that Reach is being taken, right? And the fall of Reach, as the first planet in this, like in this galactic conflict, is like a really important piece of Halo lore. When you do that, it's like cool credits, heroic stuff or whatever, but then the credits end and you're back with your character and you have your gun and you have your ammo. You're surrounded by all the guys you just killed in order to activate that cutscene, and then just more Covenant show up and you shoot them, right? Because what else are you gonna do? You're gonna shoot these Covenant, but there's nowhere to go. There's no evacuation. There's nobody to save you. You just keep shooting Covenant until eventually they overwhelm you and you die. And it's like, oh my god, brutal, right? There's no escape. There's nowhere you could go. You're just in this, I loved that when I played it, which was maybe like 10 years ago or whatever. Reach is a pretty old game, I guess. It's like 2009, I want to say, maybe 2011. And I feel like that would maybe be like the kind of ending that you, right, where it's just like the combat doesn't end and they're just throwing more and more powerful stuff until eventually, right, like all of the heroes, your sorcerer runs out of spell slots, your cleric runs out of healing, and you guys die.
Yeah, I think that's just a hard thing to. I think from a system standpoint, that's a hard thing to pull off in D&D or Pathfinder, where like the system is so noble bright by its nature that like it's really hard to put the characters in a situation that they can't run away from at the very least. But like I think you're right.
Yeah, like you would have to, and especially because like at that point you're so powerful, you can be casting teleport, right? Like that kind of stuff. You'd have to figure out that. It's kind of like how when I did the campaign for 7th Expedition, right? Which is like fantasy Lewis and Clark, basically. I had talked about how you probably have to get rid of some spells in order to make it work. Like it's hard to do that with Overland Flight as a spell, right? Where it's like, well, okay, well, obviously you just bring in a high-level wizard, have them cast Overland Flight, boom, easy, right? Well, so okay, we can't do that, right? Or even stuff like create food and water kind of becomes problematic because part of the intention, the system's intention for that game is that you have to forage in order to keep your party up and running, that kind of stuff. Anyway, we're kind of like at our hour. That's sort of the end result of this Stalingrad pitch. But that's what I had. I've had this one in the chamber for a long time, to be honest. But it was a combination of Oppenheimer making me go back and learn to stuff so that I could yell at people about their dumb moralistic takes on the atomic bombs, because everyone is so stupid about that. And playing Baldur's Gate that put me in this like headspace again.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, I've got one of these days I will fully flesh out, because I've got a. This is a thing I might run at some point, so I don't want to give too much away. But I've got an idea that's essentially the campaign is like it's like a hidden Cold War analogy, and like one of the adventures in there is, essentially the Bay of Pigs invasion, and you essentially don't reveal that to the players, and you see how it goes, right? Like, Bay of Pigs invasion, for people who don't know, is basically a bunch of Cuban nationals who are in the United States suit up and try and invade Cuba via the Bay of Pigs. And I think it's Kennedy had promised to back them up, and basically decided that the political essentially the international blowback, right? Like the problems that would cause Russia wasn't worth it, and so basically refused to back up the Frogmen, and so the Bay of Pigs invasion fails. A couple of years ago, I went to Miami to the Bay of Pigs invasion museum, where the guy there was like the guy who gave the talk was a frogman, and he was like, fucking, he sold us out, right? Like, and he was like, we should have taken back Cuba, things could have been great, right? But like that's essentially in a very small nutshell, the pitch is like, you invade, you're promised you're going to get back up, and then when you go to get back up, they're like, sorry, backup's not coming, right? Backup's not coming for political reasons, and you got to figure out. I don't. It can end poorly, but I think the fantasy there is like escaping or maybe even winning the Bay of Pigs invasion in that allegory. But that's neither here nor there.
No, I feel so. Another version of this pitch. This is actually a different kind of pitch, but another version of this pitch was So I was thinking about World War II movies. World War II is a really fun place to set movies because there's all these different interesting locations. It is a truly world war. It's happening in tropical jungles in the Pacific. It's happening in the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic, right? It's happening in the frigid Russian steppe. It's happening in the Blitz, right? And there was another part of me that was thinking, wouldn't it be fun to do essentially kind of like World War II but magic, right? Like a fantasy world war, where you have players who can kind of go do the greatest hits, right? And you could then, in that version, you could have books that it's like, well, maybe for a certain period of time they're with ships and they're doing the Battle of Midway, right? Or a certain period of time they do Normandy, right? And they go from that to Normandy, and then they go from Normandy to Stalingrad, and then they go from Stalingrad to like tank battles like El Alamein, I don't know, whatever the big tank battle in North Africa is, like that stuff, right? Because I just think that there's a lot of stuff you can kind of do with sort of a pitch like that. But at the end of the day, I sort of think that's too wide. All of those things kind of deserve to be their own sort of kind of in the same way that like doing a pirate campaign at the same time you're doing what would you like? What's another kind of campaign? Another campaign is like not a good thing. You wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah, no, this is why the Cold War appeals to me as kind of like a framework, because it's a lot of kind of like small scale action, right? It's a lot of proxy stuff. It's a lot of espionage, which, like, is doable by like spy shit you can do like on the player character level. The risk with war stuff is that like essentially the scope gets a little too large for it to work for an adventuring party. But I think the Cold War is pretty perfect. Like, the Cold War stuff's pretty perfect for that kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that for sure. Anyway,
yeah,
that's time. So, what's going on in your life? You want to talk about Gen Con?
Yeah, I would say speaking of wars, I want to talk about some stuff at Gen Con. I'm going to go a little bit out of order, but one of the things I did was they did a national security decision making mega game, which I'm falling more and more in love with. The way these work is it's a bunch of people.
Mega games in general, or just
specifically the national security decision making, right? Because there's like basically no mechanical systems in them, right? So so I don't think you've been around for like we did one last year, and I went solo this year, so I did one. But essentially, it's a bunch of like old hats from some of them who used to be in like defense, and some of them are just like kind of like experts in the air in kind of like the area, and sometimes they run these things for like the naval college, right? They run for them professionally, and they run it for like hobbyists and enthusiasts. And what they do is they assign you a role, and the role they assign you isn't necessarily a particular person. It's kind of like the way they describe it's like a cone of people, right? One person gets assigned the president of the United States, but you're not playing like Joe Biden. You are playing the office of the presidency, so that if the president in the course of the scenario gets assassinated, he gets replaced, and you're playing the office of the presidency, right? And they hand these out at random, so you don't like get to play with your friends, which is interesting. And they don't tell you too much about what's happening, right? So I played. It was like a near future science fiction mega game, right? And I thought there was gonna be some fantastical elements. Last year I played one where like aliens contact. This one, it was like near future science fiction. I'm like, oh, okay. I get handed a card, and it's essentially I am playing Seoul, South Korea. The way the character is like the mayor of Seoul, South Korea, right? There's some people playing Russia, some people playing Japan, some people playing various parts of the United States. Game starts. They have a news feed on the wall, and within like 2 minutes, it says there's like skirmishing in North Korea, and then a minute later, 2 ballistic nukes strike Seoul. Yeah, right. And so it's just like, holy shit, right? Like everybody's going crazy. I'm trying to get people evacuated out of Seoul, right? So the only mechanics in the game is you have a sheet with a thing you want to do, and you need to get approval from relevant parties, right? Like I wanted to evacuate Seoul. I needed to get help from, the military, help from industry, and then you need to get like to make it more effective. I went and I got like the United States to dedicate some foreign aid, right? And so I'm busy moving people south. Meanwhile, the president of Seoul is like apparently has a bug up his ass about like the United States because the president isn't paying him enough attention. So first he signs a loan with China for a bunch of money. It's like, we get that, but like that's not good, right? Then I go back to them to try and get more funding for my like evacuation, and it's like, why did you guys sign a loan with China? Why didn't you come to us? I'm like, I don't know. I didn't want. I appreciate you. And it's like this, and then the president tells us we're not allowed to meet with the United States unless they come to us, and I'm still trying to like get things done. Then within like, then what? So like we start talking, and the military is like, I need to talk to the United States. They're like our best military ally, right? And one of the things in the back of my card it says is like one of the things you can do is like initiate like a vote of no confidence in the head of government. And so I had that written down. I was like, I might need to pull it at some point. So I just pull it out of my pocket. I'm like, I don't know if we want to do this, like because so the whole point of this is like what they say is like these don't prove anything, but it's to teach you how people like make decisions. And this like really became clear to me, right? They pull this out like, I don't know if we want to do this or not, but like it's on the table. And then the president swings by and says, the United States military is pulling out of the peninsula. And literally every single one of like the military commanders just like comes over and signs me a sheet of paper saying no confidence in the president of South Korea. And we like basically like browbeat the foreign, or no, we browbeat the education minister into signing, because that makes it a democratic overthrow instead of a military coup.
Right.
And I handed
Oh my God.
I handed it and I become president for like 10 seconds just as the game ends. Um, so it's like
this is like Model UN but fun. Have
yes,
you ever done
yes,
Model
yeah,
UN
no,
before?
that is exactly correct. It's just like Model UN or Model Congress. It is so much fun. I had less of a great experience last year. That's because I didn't quite get it, but it's so interesting. And then I didn't go to any this year, but those guys will give lectures too, because like I said, they're old hats that like know stuff about that kind of thing. So I highly recommend it to anybody going to Gen Con to check out national security decision making.
That's so cool. I mean, it's funny because I've been doing. Do you know the YouTube channel? Let Me Know. Have you ever seen these guys?
No.
Let Me Know is like a YouTube channel. They recently blew up for a completely unrelated reason, right? Which is that XQC, the big streamer XQC, blew up.
Is this about the React video controversy thing?
Yeah, this is like the React video stuff. So Let Me Know makes a video about the Let Me Know makes a video about the Kennedy assassination. And it's not specifically a debunking video, right? But it does, if you follow the line of logic, obviously debunk any conspiracies around the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Basically, the most conspiracy thing I would consider probably on the planet, right? Like, I think most people think that there was some other right? Because Jesus, the story of the assassination of John F. Kennedy is kind of fucking crazy on its face. Some random guy named Lee Harvey Oswald fires off 3 shots, works completely alone, kills the president of the United fucking States of America. He goes into interrogation with the FBI that isn't recorded for I think 2 days. And as he's being transferred to another prison, another guy shows up, kills him, kills himself. How is that not a conspiracy, right? But the thing that the Let Me Know guy does is he really just sort of breaks down the whole everything that happened that day. All the witness testimony, right? Like what people saw, what they were talking about, what they were doing. And it's just like, everything is so coincidental, it couldn't possibly be a conspiracy, right? The way Lee Harvey Oswald got that job is his wife was talking to a neighbor, right, who he'd never met. The neighbor mentioned that her brother got a job at the book depository in Dallas, and she sent like Lee that job listing or whatever, and then he got that job a couple of weeks before the Kennedy assassination. It's like you can't do that. That doesn't make any like no CIA, FBI, lizard man conspiracy could make that random set of events transpire, right? They had to have happened that certain sort of way. And then he sits and he kind of goes through all of this witness testimony about how kind of unreliable a lot of people are. And it's one of those things where in most conspiratorial frames of thinking, right, when you hear witness testimony that doesn't line up with what you have been told, that sets off red flags that, something is amiss. But when you hear that every witness in this case, some people heard 6 shots, some people heard 4, some people heard 2 or whatever, and it's like one guy who's a firearms expert said, I heard 3 shots, but I also heard the ricochet echo, whatever it would be called, right, off of the walls of the shot. It's like, that guy is actually probably right, and everybody else who are describing more shots are wrong. Stuff about like that, all this stuff with the grass, and when you line all of those up right next to each other, it just makes it absurd to hear any of these people describe testimony that is like counter. It's just like, yes, people are unreliable human beings. Obviously, that's how things.
So the other part of this, like the real JFK conspiracy, is like the Harvey Oswald was like an avowed communist. I think he like defected or was like thinking of defecting or something like that, and the Russians pushed these conspiracy theories because they didn't want to start a fucking war with America, right? Like they didn't want people to think Lee Harvey Oswald assassinated the president on the orders of the Soviet Union because they didn't order it. They didn't fucking want that to happen. The guy was just a fucking, crazy communist, right?
He did in fact defect to the Soviet Union, and he defected back because he thought he was going to be welcomed. Like, he thought he was going to get all this cool stuff for being a defector, but no, it turns out sort of his life sucked in the US, and it also sucked in the USSR, and so he just defected right back.
Right.
And he literally walked into the embassy, and he said, "I'd like my passport back," after he had renounced his citizenship. And the poor bookkeeping, or whatever, the bookkeeping was so bad that they didn't realize that he had like renounced his citizenship, and they just gave him a new passport. Because why not, right? Like, he's an American citizen who wants a new passport, obviously, kind of thing. And it's just like, all of that stuff makes me the least conspiracy-minded person on the planet. All of the world is defined by individual people who are just trying to make decisions, and a lot of those are really like incredibly tangled webs of like information and misinformation and confirmation bias and all these other sorts of things.
Just like,
so I really empathize. Yeah,
things you don't think of. Something that the guy pointed out, like one of the leaders pointed out, no one fired on North Korea. No one said, launch nukes back, right? Because like, not only did they bomb Seoul, they bombed like Shanghai and they bombed Alaska, right? But like, nobody wanted to fucking like set off the firestorm, so no one actually launched anything back, right? Like, everybody's just like still trying to figure out how to deal with the fallout, and no one actually bothers to like, people are starting to like make a military advance, right? But like, no one actually fires back into Pyongyang, right? Like, this is the same thing that happened last year, right? You get aliens contact the Earth, and this is like Cold War era in that scenario. And so people start like talking to each other, and like America and Russia start negotiating how they're going to deal with this. No one messages the aliens back and try and figure out what they're up to, right? Everybody just gets caught in their own circles trying to deal with everything that's happening around them. They missed like kind of the obvious step.
What's funny? We did one of these when I was in high school. We did our own congressional congress, right? Where people were different delegates, right? You weren't, obviously there's like however many kids in a class, like 23 kids in a class, there's like a gazillion delegates. But there's also more states than that. So it's like different people were different sort of factions of delegates inside of their individual states. And I was Pennsylvania. I think I was like the liberal wing or like the revolutionary wing of Pennsylvania, the delegation, which is like the Ben Franklin sort of, right?
Okay,
But the thing that we were doing the Congressional Congress, and someone pitched a Senate and
the Continental Congress.
Oh, I'm sorry, Continental Congress. Why am I saying Congressional? The Continental Congress. Somebody pitched the Senate and the House of Representatives or whatever. And I pitched a third body. I pitched a third body of government where I was like, if we want this government to be of the people, then I think just like you can be, because we had established jury duty by that point. I was like, you can be pulled to be essentially a congressperson. And I was like, that way you could never have the Senate and like the Congress deadlock, because you always have something to break the tie, another body of Congress. And we did this whole thing. This was like a week, or we did this whole thing. We created a whole thing that was built around funnily enough, it was built around professions, is the way that we ended up sort of like letting it break down, where the idea was it was almost kind of class based, but it was a little more specific than that. You had a certain number of teachers, you had a certain number of merchants, you had a certain number of whatever else. And at the end of that, my teacher was like, you guys never made a presidency. You got so wrapped up in, you guys got so wrapped up in this like this crazy Congress stuff that you never actually established that there would be a president and an executive branch, which I thought was funny. Though he also said that like he said most years people just kind of walk in the footsteps of history, right? They make a House, they make a Senate, they get a certain concessions. You do the 3/5 compromise. That's kind of like what stuff is like built for, right? To kind of show the decision making and the compromise and all that other kind of thing. It was like going off on this wild tangent of having a whole nother body of lawmakers in Congress is not something that's. But yeah, anyway. God, I love that shit so much.
Hey, if you ever come back to Gen Con, that's the thing to check out.
I know. I would have done Gen Con, but next week I'm doing a big meetup. We're doing the Akupara shell out. And before that, I had done Sequoias with Rachel. So we just gotten done doing big trips.
Yeah.
Plus, I would have missed out on fucking Baldur's Gate. But can I tell you, I bought Baldur's Gate. Let's take a look. I bought Baldur's Gate Friday night. Okay, on like it was Friday night. Friend of the cast, Charles, pinged me. It was like, hey, I'm thinking about buying Baldur's Gate, but I don't want to go crazy. I want to play with a group. And I was like, sure. And I pinged other friend of the cast, Josh, and other friend of the cast, Lou, and we ended up playing that night. And then I told Rachel, I was like, this game is fun. You'd like this game. 29 hours later, 29 hours in 2 days, I can say Baldur's Gate is fun as fuck. Okay. I can't believe I have to say this. D&D 5e is better than Pathfinder, I think. And I don't know that I would have made that.
I disagree 100%, but that is I think that's like a CRPG versus TTRPG thing.
Okay, it might be that. Playing Kingmaker, which I really, I fell down that rabbit hard. But playing Kingmaker kind of next to playing Baldur's Gate, it's nuts. How much better D&D 5e and which, to be fair, maybe it's specifically there's some other stuff.
This is Larian versus Owlcat, I think, in that case, right? Like,
really, why?
Oh, because Owlcat is not a AAA. Larian had like 5 or 6 years to make the most complete RPG they could. Wrath of the Righteous and Kingmaker are good, but they are kind of like notoriously hard, notoriously buggy. I played Rogue Trader, the new Owlcat game, at Gen Con, and it's just kind of like, I don't think that's a product of the systems. I think that's a product of like the ability to do, like, from what I've seen, I haven't put fingers on Baldur's Gate yet just because I've been away. Like, you can get close to the tabletop experience because they put in the effort to give you that kind of thing. Whereas, like...
Okay, so I'm making a slightly different point, which is that I think... so part of it is, I do think it is tabletop versus CRPG. One of the things that became pretty evident pretty quickly to me playing Kingmaker is how fucking broken buffs are from... right, or like sort of spellcasters, right? You have to have somebody who casts haste at the beginning of every fight because it's just so good to buff your entire party with an additional attack and a full attack or a full round action, all that other kind of thing. That's like a piece of it, and I think that is a true result of tabletop versus CRPG. In tabletop, when you play wizard, it's not fun to buff people, which is why I think they're so powerful, right? It's like a balancing mechanism, but the balance isn't about like raw numbers. The balance is about, it should be fun for a wizard to cast a buff on his friends, and the fun thing about that is that it's so incredibly strong, right? In a CRPG where you're not dealing with individualized personalities, right, and like wants and goals and desires and all that other sort of thing, right? But haste is still as powerful as haste is. You don't have to ameliorate a wizard player. You can just cast haste at the beginning of every combat encounter, right? You can just do that if you want. And I think, and so that's something that I think is like CRPG, but tabletop stuff.
I think you've also got a point about like PF1E versus 5E has like Pathfinder gets pretty quickly into rock attack territory. PF1E, like haste in PF2E affects one person and it doesn't give you as many things to do, right? Like,
Yeah, that's probably fair. To be fair, I am specifically comparing 1E, not 2E. But the thing about 5E that also feels insane is Advantage is such a great system for feeling good about taking certain kinds of sort of like checks or whatever, right? One of the things I'm doing in Baldur's Gate, and this is a sort of a CRPG tabletop sort of thing, I'm playing a rogue, right? I think rogue gets simplified a lot by just saying, do you have advantage? Yes, no. If you do, sneak attack. If not, well, no sneak attack, right? And a lot of what I'm doing is like, okay, well, what are the different ways that I can find advantage in a right? Part of this is like I've equipped a hunting bow, right? Like a hunting short bow that says when you're attacking a certain type of monster, right, you have advantage on those attacks. Well, that's just sneak attack on everything, right? That feels great, right? But like flanking and stuff doesn't quite work the way that it normally sort of would, and that's okay. Because you have to find like interesting stuff. But I think the advantage and disadvantage is just such a simple, elegant way to impart that to a player that it's really, man, that's a really good system. I really like advantage. The one thing I would say that's interesting about Pathfinder though, especially 2E, is you have degrees of success, right? You have critical successes by beating a thing like 5 or more or whatever.
10 or
I think
more.
that's actually really interesting. And I would be interested to see what a Pathfinder 2E sort of Baldur's Gate kind of looks like for them.
Yeah, I think I would be too. I don't think there's anything in the works right now for it, but I think I agree.
But anyway, when I said that I think D&D is better than Pathfinder, you would say 2E Pathfinder 2E is better than D&D 5E is what you're saying?
I prefer it, but that's part of 5E's thing is bounded accuracy, right? And so like I feel like I appreciate the mechanical complexity of 2E a lot more than I do of 5E. And part of that is also just kind of like, it's individual. I think way too much of it is in fact your DM, and in this case, that's like Owlcat versus Larian, right? Like, I think Baldur's Gate 3 is probably a better written adventure than any of the Pathfinder adventure paths. That's not throwing shit at any of the adventure path people. It's just like you only have so much time and resources to write a book, right? And you can only write so many pages of it. It's not the old way. I will point out that PF2, Zulu in the chat says, Grandpa Mango likes the old way. PF2 is newer than 5e at this point. It is the newer way. I like the deeper mechanical complexity, but I always think it comes down to like adventure design. Like something the Angry GM likes to say is that D&D and Pathfinder and RPG systems, they're not games, they are game systems. The game designer is the GM. And so it comes down to that a lot. And like, I think it's very easy for adventure paths to kind of, when you're playing an adventure path, to kind of like fall into like rotely running it. Like you put a lot of effort into making Hell's Rebel something special and unique, but a lot of people don't do that. And I think the Owlcat games are pretty bog standard versions of those adventure paths. Whereas I think Larian did something special with Baldur's Gate 3. They had the time and the resources, and the kind of like permission to like go all out on it. And so you've got like what seems to be a masterpiece, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I will say that a piece of this puzzle is just raw game design stuff. One of the things that Baldur's Gate does that I prefer compared to Kingmaker is it limits your party to 4. Pathfinder, in Wrath and in Kingmaker, you can have 6 people in the party, and I think that's too many. I think a party of 4 creates contours that are actually really interesting to explore because you have strengths and weaknesses, right? You don't just one of the things a 6-player party can have everything. They can have a face, right? They can have lockpicks. They can have trap finding. They can have animal handling. They can have a healer. They can have a tank. They can have melee DPS and range DPS. They can have an arcane caster and a divine caster, right? All of these sorts of things are covered, and in a certain sense, it's fun, right? Like one of the things I liked about playing Pathfinder Kingmaker was finding different configurations that all sort of did effectively the same thing, right? It's kind of the fun of like building like Tetris in a way, right? Of like filling in every gap so that you have like kind of like a perfect structure. That's like a fun thing. It's like, oh, well, I'm gonna get haste from this caster. I'm gonna get this from that caster. I'm gonna be able to do traps from this. Be able to do healing from that person, right? And you have a bunch of different people who can fill these roles, but with a couple of like little overlaps or whatever. Maybe you don't have a true tank, right? But you have a druid that can swap into bear form and a cleric in heavy armor, and kind of both of them together sort of makes a tank, right? That kind of thinking, that kind of thing. Baldur's Gate is very different. Baldur's Gate, in order to make a party, you have to give shit up. You can't have everything. You can't have a tank, a healer, a arcane spellcaster, a rogue, or somebody doing like lockpicks, somebody doing trap finding. You can't have you just can't have everything. You can't have it all. And I think that's really interesting. That's like a really compelling piece of sort of the game, is like figuring out who I want in my party to do stuff. Part of this is that I have not played solo. I have played with people, right? So I played with our group on that Friday night, and then the rest of my time I was playing with Rachel. And playing with Rachel was really neat because it gave us, playing two people with Baldur's Gate, you fill out half your party with kind of AI companions, right? But you control those companions, right? So it's about, okay, these two party members are set. In this case, it's me playing a rogue, she's playing a bard. And it's who are those last two slots going to? And we each get one choice, right? So when I'm choosing a fighter who can use fighter stuff in order to give me advantage on attack rolls, right? I'm playing somebody who's synergistic kind of with my fighting style, right? She's playing, like a warlock. It's different. And it's that kind of stuff that I think is neat. Anyway, Baldur's Gate 3, boy, did that suck me in this whole weekend. And yeah, it's a good game. We'll talk about it more, I guess, next week, probably.
Yeah. Other things from Gen Con, what else did I play? I played Bulldogs exclamation point, which is a fate-based system, and basically the idea is like if you picked a bunch of people from the Mos Eisley Cantina and made them ship cargo, and it's super fun, it's super goofy. I love that game. I picked up a copy of it. It's from like an independent game developers network. I played as basically like a sentient gremlin that could like imitate anything's voice, and the guy had a bunch of systems kind of like basically generating what the issue, like, it's like you're transporting wine, roll some dice, and the issue is it's hard to transport, and roll some dice, and it turns out that so the players are playing into it too, so it's like, oh, the wine is just being transported in the hold, it's not actually in anything. It's relatively mechanics light and fun, kind of like fun heavy, great for one shot, right? Like we've played a bunch of games like this. It like in concept and kind of like form, it reminded me a lot of that Mask of the Luchador game we played a couple of years ago. What else did I play? I played another mega game called Oligopoly, which was interesting in that it was basically a giant board game, right? And it was like kind of the least mega gamey of any of the mega games. It was just like a lot of people playing like a custom tabletop board game. It was fun, but it wasn't like a lot of kind of like, go to the GM and see if you can like do this weird thing that's like not, circumscribed in the rules. It was very much like do exactly what's in the rules and like try and get people to trade things with you and that kind of thing. There were a couple of things that happened, like, basically the idea is some players played cities, some players played corporations in those cities. And basically Houston and Dallas immediately merged with each other and they basically swept the game, which like I think just like basically broke the mechanics of the game. But still was a lot of fun. What else did I play? Let me I played Pirate Borg. Have you heard of Morkborg?
Mm-mm.
So Morkborg is this kind of like heavy metal styled kind of like rules light, hardcore blood and gore thing. And Pirate Borg is this custom thing that's basically like, think Pirates of the Caribbean, but with like a shading of like metal and like, evil a little bit darker. And that was super fun. Part of it was the GM. GM had like the secondary character along with his name was Swabby, and he did a great job playing it. A lot of like piratiness to it. That was super fun. I played Tales of the Valiant, which is Kobold Press. When Wizards was like, and we're changing the OGL, Kobold Press was like, and we're gonna make our own game. I was like, oh, I'm interested to see what this is. Are we gonna get another Pathfinder? Tales of the Valiant felt like 5e with the like numbers filed off, so much so that like I feel like there's less difference between Tales of the Valiant and 5e than there is between the Pathfinder 2 and the Pathfinder 2e remaster. And that's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but like there's like 4 things that I could tell that were different. And that's basically it. But you know, it was still fun. I played a little scenario where, you know, we basically fend off an army of goblins and an army of zombies. What else did I play? That was fun. I play tested a game I can't remember the name of. That was neat. Oh, the one kind of negative experience I had, and I don't want to put this on the people that made the game. Basically, the small indie games company, they made a game called Darwin Awards. And Darwin Awards is this card game where it's kind of like, think of like any of these kind of like storytelling games. You get some stuff and you have to like tell a story around it. And you get a bunch of cards. You have to tell a story about how when someone dies stupidly, and the idea is to make it as funny as possible. And I just don't think the cards worked well together. Like, I think too many of the things overlapped. It was weird because like it had like an item, a place, an action, and a cause of death. But like often it was just like so overlapping that like, you know, like there was like I got like butter knife, jungle gym as the place, falling off a cliff while taking a selfie as the cause of death, and removing a tree branch as my action. And there's just like too much overspecified there, right? Like I really wanted to just like pull off one of them. Like I actually think that you could solve most of the problems with the game by getting rid of the cause of death pile and just having people do, you know, location, item, action, because the cause of death I think just like prescribes too much. The other thing is that they had an After Dark version, and I don't want to put any blame on them because they asked if it was cool, right? And I was like, sure, I'm not a prude, right? And the cards were just too much, especially for me to do with strangers, right? Like I pulled the card and it was like, you know, Sex Master 6000 Pussy Pump. And I'm like, I can't talk about, I just can't do this right now. And so I was like, thank you. This is a great time. I'm going to leave now. And I walked away. But you know, I still want to say that, like, you know, it was still an interesting time. And so, you know, that's all you can ask for, right? Other thing, like I bought a bunch of nonsense in the hall. The big story coming out of, at least when I was there, all the Uber drivers were telling me about it. Somebody walked in the back of Gen Con on Wednesday, took a pallet fork, and just stole $300,000 worth of collectible trading cards. Like, yeah. Looked at the camera while they were doing it, so they know, like, they're trying to figure out who it was, but, you know. Disney was premiering a new card game called Lorcana, which everybody, like, people were waiting like 6 hours in line for. I was like, what the fuck is this? Who cares? Like I said,
Disney adults, am I right?
Yeah. You know, Gen Con is back. Like 2 years ago, it was half full. Last year, it was pretty full. This year, it was more full than I've ever seen it, especially on like the trading hall. The exhibition hall was full on like Sunday at noon, which is like usually it's kind of like thinned out by then. People were selling out of stuff. I spent too much money on a set of dice that I want to show because they are very pretty. Ooh, look at that!
What makes them so special?
They are so here. Let me pull out a single dice so I don't like dump them all out. So I don't know if you can see that. Here, let me put my hand behind it so it focuses. It's like layered stone that's fused together.
Oh, fancy.
Yeah, the company is Level Up Dice. They also gave me Tim Tams with a purchase because they're like a British company. I spent over $100 on this set, which is like more than I would usually. But basically, I said to myself, I didn't buy 6 systems that I'm never going to play, so I can afford to splurge on the dice a little bit this time. But there was some, as always, there's cool stuff there. It was super fun. I always love going there. I'll be going back again next year unless fate prescribes otherwise. But Gen Con was a great time. And you were sorely missed, as was everybody else. But
I guess we're becoming 30-year-olds with like stuff to do, right?
Yeah, stuff to do. I was like thinking about it, like you had like work stuff. Nick had work stuff. Many other friends of the cast are either in the process of or have recently had a child, right? And it's like that's like when I realized it was like 3 or 4 people were like it was kid related. I was like, oh, that's why, like, you know, like, you know, it's usually like younger guys and older guys. It's because the kids,
Yep.
right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you had a good time. I don't know. Maybe next year we'll see.
Hey. Maybe one of these years Evo won't be the same weekend as Gen Con, so I can go to both again. But
I heard Evo was hype as hell. People
Yeah.
were going nuts on Twitter for whatever the final like match was or whatever. There's some guy, was he blind and he was winning Street Fighter matches or something like that?
Oh, I was not aware of this. I know the big one thing I saw was like Leffen and Mango, who are not me, who are the Smash players. I guess we're playing Strive, and like I think Leffen's kind of like an internet villain. And Mango's kind of like Leffen's a heel, and Mango's a face, and Leffen won apparently pretty hard. So yeah, yeah,
drama.
Yeah, very much drama. But yeah, no, I have not caught up on the Evo coverage yet, just because I was at Gen Con. But you know, that's been that. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with your week before we punch out?
No, we just call it a day.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you'd like to email us with any of the things that you heard about on this podcast, reach us at derpsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@derpsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/derpsplaygames or youtube.com/@somederpsplaygames. So these go out live. Rate reviews wherever you find podcasts. That's everything I had. Buddy, you have anything you're looking to promote?
Not this week. I don't have anything I'm looking to promote.
Well, in that case, I'm going to say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.